Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast IDP edition. I'm John Macri, and I'm back to go over the top IDP takeaways from week 5, where this week I'm going to highlight a handful of the top performers and underperformers at the defensive line position to get a feel for what we should and shouldn't be buying going forward. I'll highlight a couple of DB situations as well. And of course, we'll touch on the ever-changing linebacker landscape and provide a few key updates there. As we've been doing, I'm not going over every single game for this recap pod, but just our biggest takeaways that can help us prep again for the week ahead, waivers and stuff like that, but also hopefully provide some kind of rest of season insight on how I'm treating these defensive linemen, specifically that I'm going to be covering going forward. As usual, I'll also have the IDP fantasy report out on Tuesday around noon Eastern time on Tuesday, which will have all the snap counts, data, notes, waiver targets, all that fun stuff for the entire week, which you can get access to with a PFF Plus subscription. And you'll get access to IDP rankings, all of our fantasy rankings, and the many, many pieces of content that we offer here at PFF. So make sure you do that. Okay, without further ado, let's get into it. And we'll start with some of those defensive linemen who are either underperforming or overperforming a little bit relative to expectations and dive into the numbers to kind of figure out what we should think of them going forward. And the first guy I wanted to talk about was somebody that did perform in a big way this week. Trayvon Walker of the Jacksonville Jaguars, a former first overall pick, of course, delivers a huge day, coming up with 3 sacks, an 84.4 pass rush grade so far before review, and doing so against a very good Indianapolis Colts offensive line. Now, this was kind of undoubtedly the best game of Walker's season, and if that pass rush grade holds, even if it comes down a bit at 84.4, like it'll be the second best single game pass rush grade of his entire career, which is just behind a 91.6 from his rookie season in 2022, which he did on just 13 pass rush snaps, by the way. So just like 1 or 2 of those plays on that smaller sample size will affect the grade a lot more. This week, he did it on 39 pass rush attempts, the most on the team. So now, wondering if we should chase this production. Obviously, 3 sacks is huge, considering he's a former number 1 overall pick, which will undoubtedly get people excited. But he's an interesting case, right? Because coming out of college, he was a very raw project, athletic AF, but a project nonetheless, because he wasn't like a good pass rusher yet, right? So we knew it would take some time for him to kind of put it all together. It's year 3 now, so this is typically where this progression should start to show. So far this season, though, it wasn't showing, right? Just a 54.4 pass rush grade coming into the week. That is not good for a player with such a high pedigree, obviously. But like I said, the pass rush metrics were good this week, and it's easy to kind of either over or underreact to 1 week. But as far as encouragement goes, this game wasn't an easy matchup for him. The Colts were a top-graded pass block unit coming into the week, and Braden Smith is a very good right tackle, and Walker dominated him. Now, I don't necessarily think Walker's getting 3 sacks every week, or maybe not even again this season, but it was a very promising performance, and one that I'd probably say was the best of his career so far. He's a volume play as well, though. Because he's averaging 76% of the team's defensive snaps and has played the second most snaps at the position across the entire league. So he's had a nice production floor for that reason. Now, if he can start stringing together some more strong performances, he could really kind of increase his stock to the type of player we can potentially leave locked into IDP lineups like he was intended to be as the former first overall pick. For now, I'm kind of treating him as still a volume-dependent player, but depending on matchup, I might be willing to trust him a little bit more. But definitely somebody to kind of keep on the radar here in redraft leagues and dynasty leagues. I understand that he's rostered everywhere. Okay, next is a player I want to highlight. The Cincinnati Bengals edge, Sam Hubbard, who delivered a sack and a safety in this game. Now, Hubbard he's a fairly well-known IDP option from years past, right? Where he'd be, one of the more efficient tacklers at the edge position, which was also providing us, some pass rush upside as well. Now, this game, we saw both, including the pass rush production, at least in the box score, right? Because this is not a player who I think we're banking on for this sort of productivity going forward. Even asking for 1 sack from him in a game is likely a tall ask. And that's because Coming into this game, he was the lowest graded edge rusher on the season. Out of 118 qualifiers, he had the worst PFF pass rush grade. Now, that doesn't really change much as far as kind of how I'm treating him this season. Like, he's still kind of a sit for me. Like, even after this game, currently unreviewed, sits with a 54.5 pass rush grade from this game, just a 4.8% win rate. Like, those are some really below average to poor numbers, right? And, he has some name value here, but this is not a player whose production I'm kind of willing to chase right now. He did play 65% of snaps. It's where he kind of hovers around each week, which is a nice mark for edge defenders. He had his productive tackle game for the first time this season as well, but even that hasn't quite been there for him consistently this year. So it'll just kind of depend on who your other options are. But I have to believe we have better options than Sam Hubbard right now, even if they're guys who haven't been productive or as productive as this past game from Hubbard, like this season just yet. I'm not really buying this one from Hubbard. He should still mostly remain on benches and waiver wires. All right, so those were just a couple guys who did perform today, but I really wanted to kind of focus on the underperformers, which, guys that maybe aren't living up to the production that we expected them to, starting with Jonathan Greenard of the Minnesota Vikings. Now, Greenard, he did not land a sack in a slightly favorable matchup this week where he saw a mix of Tyron Smith and Olu Fashanu, Fashanu being the clear weak link there. He's kind of Greenard is kind of the guy that I get a lot of questions about. And after a quieter game, I wanted to dig a bit deeper into his numbers to figure out kind of where he stands going forward. And I came away feeling like okay by his numbers. Looking at the first week, or looking first at this week, sorry, he led the team with a 14% win rate. That's unreviewed, and had a strong 16.3% pressure rate, 74.5 pass rush grade, again unreviewed, and also currently that pass rush grade leads the team for this week. So on the season, he's earned a 12.4% win rate, 15.7% pressure rate with a 68.1 pass rush grade. So metrics aren't like amazing. They're likely within that top 36-ish range. The best thing about him right now is that he's playing a ton. Him and Andrew Van Ginkel are both playing a ton. 266 defensive snaps on the year for Greenard. That is the third most at the position. Van Ginkel's right behind him with 263 as the fourth most. So because of that, like, his pass rush metrics, don't have to be really amazing, and they're not terrible. They're just not outstanding, right? He's likely more kind of in that matchup dependent range, depending on how many other options you have available to you. So he'll likely hover in that edge 2, edge 3 range for me, depending on the week. So just be sure to check the rankings on that one, and I'm sure I'll cover it in the start sit episodes as well. All right, how about another guy that's been pretty quiet since his blow-up performance in week 1 when he had 3 sacks? Gregory Rousseau of the Buffalo Bills. So Rousseau, he's someone that I'm actually feeling pretty encouraged about right now because his pass rush metrics point to a very good player at the position. 83.5 pass rush grade on the year. That's a top 10 mark, unreviewed right now, to include this week's score. 18% win rate as well. That's also top 10 at the position. 15.1% pressure rate on the season is also really solid. 70% snap share on the year. That's led to the 15th most snaps played at the position on the season. Like, to me, Gregory Rousseau is going to stay locked in as a top 24 option at worst, based on kind of how we should treat this position and specifically all those metrics that I just mentioned. And he could potentially even be top 12 dependent on the matchup. Like, I know the production hasn't been there for the past few weeks, but everything kind of points to that production going forward and stuff that we can trust a little bit more than the sack numbers that have shown up so far for other players. And I guess that's kind of what this is all about here, right? For us going forward is kind of trusting in the talent and the upside here, which is what we really want for the edge position. And once we kind of accept that and kind of take like a 30,000 foot view of the position as a whole, we can kind of live with the duds a little bit. That's just how we have to treat this position, in my opinion. Like, our linebackers are our consistent production floor players. Defensive linemen, they're there for the upside. And then, we get a mix of that for the defensive backs. So, really trusting the talent and the opportunity for Greg Rousseau. Like as far as rest of the season goes, like I feel very strongly about him, and he should be in a nice spot to produce going forward. Okay, next, two guys who kind of fall into that same bucket as well, or at least one of them does. So let's see what's going on with the Houston Texans pass rushers, specifically Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson. And we'll start with Hunter because I know the two of them, they have done nothing. People are pissed about Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson. So what do we do? Again, I'll start with Hunter because he is playing really well, and he played playing a strong snap share as well. 20.7% pass rush win rate this week for Danielle Hunter. Again, that's unreviewed right now. If it holds, that'll be the third time this season he's exceeded a 20% win rate in a week. So four, actually, if we round up to his 19.5% from week 2. His only down week really was week 4 against the Jaguars, surprisingly, but 19.1% win rate on the year. That's a top 10 mark for his position. 78.2 pass rush grade. That's top 15. He's played 80% of the defensive snaps as well. Like those are ideal numbers that we just have to trust the process here with this guy. Just one game with a sack this season. So I get it. Like it's frustrating AF, but if don't tell you the box production score, right? And I said to you before your fantasy draft that you can have an edge rusher posting top 15 pass rush metrics, playing 80% of defensive snaps. Like he'd be a top 12, top 10 drafted player at his position, which he was, right? Again, kind of taking a larger view of the position as a whole and knowing how rare that is and how hard those numbers are to achieve. And those are the kind of things that matter the most in delivering sacks over an entire season. So we're going to take that for Danielle Hunter. He's playing like the player we drafted him as. The problem with IDP is that his box score hasn't reflected that just yet, right? So for me, I know it's probably an eye roller for you Danielle Hunter managers, but we got to stick with it unless you have some amazing backup options and just, I think you just understand that as far as predicting sacks for the rest of the season, those numbers from Hunter are definitely ones worth trusting. Was also a difficult matchup this week going against the Bills offensive line and Josh Allen, who does not take many sacks. Next week, a much better matchup against the Patriots, who rank 30th in pass blocking grade heading into this week. As for Will Anderson, there is at least like some reason to be concerned because he hasn't been as good of a pass rusher. And not even to say that we should give up on him because it's early in the year and we saw what he did last year to win Defensive Rookie of the Year, but 12.9% win rate on the year, 15% pressure rate, 59.2 pass rush grade. Like, they're not like so bad that we can't trust him, but they're not what we're expecting from him. So he comes down in kind of how I'm viewing him for redraft right now, more of that kind of low end edge 2 at best. But like I said, better matchup in week 6 against New England. So I'm sure Will Anderson will have the huge game while Danielle Hunter shits the bed because that's just how these things go sometimes, especially after I spend so much time breaking it down. But we'll have to wait and see on that one. Okay, next name is an edge rusher that I'm not going to tell you to stick with if you don't want to. It's Rashawn Gary of the Green Bay Packers. I wish I could explain it, but he's in the midst of his worst pass rushing season of his career, which includes his rookie year when he was incredibly raw coming out of Michigan. And I said it on Start Sit this week. It was the ideal matchup for him to deliver at least strong pass rush metrics, even if he couldn't land a sack going against the worst ranked offensive line in the league. If he could at least show something in terms of the pass rush metrics, like you'd start to feel a little bit better about him. And he didn't do it. Unreviewed right now, 57.0 pass rush grade, 12.5% win rate, 3.1% pressure rate. On the year, that brings him to a 5.3% win rate, a 5.3% pressure rate, and a 52.5 pass rush grade. Those numbers all rank outside of the top 100 edge rushers this season. So Gary's really just made it easy for us. He's not to be trusted at all right now. He'll likely be ranked outside the top 36 edges for me going forward. All right, that'll do it for the defensive linemen. If there are players in the future that you want me to cover, just shout them in the comments. I'll do my best to kind of include them in the next recaps. Now, I did want to take a quick look at a couple of DB situations to be aware of and head back to the Rams safeties, who I thought we were done covering. The usage seemed pretty locked in between Cameron Curl and Quinton Lake, but we did get a noteworthy shift this week. So we actually saw Cameron Curl outproduce Quinton Lake this season. And that wasn't just your like typical variance. There was actually a change in how these guys were deployed, where Quinton Lake, who had previously manned the slot for nearly half of all of his snaps heading into this week, only spent 23% of his snaps lined up in the slot this week, and was sorry, yeah, sorry, he spent like a lot, 75% of his snaps in the slot, or lined up deep this week and not in the slot. I'm messing up my words. He only spent 3 snaps in the slot. It's late. It's like past 1 a.m. here. That Sunday Night Football game went long. But yeah, what I was saying, that Lake spent most of his time in the slot coming into this week, only 23% deep. This week, he actually only spent 3 snaps in the slot. That role was given to Kobe Durant, and Lake spent 75% of his snaps lined up deep. That's a pretty huge difference. Obviously, where that, if that's the norm going forward, it takes away a lot of the usage that makes Quinton Lake's IDP value, right? So then if you look at Cameron Curl, he actually moved a bit more into the box this week. He spent 42% of his snaps in the box, which is a great number for him. And it was up from his 34% on the season. And then thanks to Lake playing more deep, Curl only spent 41% of his snaps deep, which is down from his 58% norm. So could be a one-time thing, because Darius Williams just got off IR. They were easing him in. He didn't play a full workload. Tre'Davious White was a healthy scratch, so the corners kind of got moved around a bit, but just something to kind of keep in mind, at least, even though they're on a bye next week, something to kind of store on our memory cards until week 7. Okay, and then last DB to cover really quickly, Cam Lewis of the Buffalo Bills, who has been a very productive IDP, likely got picked up in a lot of leagues because of that production. Had another productive game this week with 8 tackles, including a tackle for a loss. Cam Lewis of the Buffalo Bills. He's had ideal usage throughout his time as a starter so far, and has been really productive because of it. Now, important to note that Lewis has been filling in for the starter, Teron Johnson, who did return to practice this past week, which likely puts Cam Lewis's time as a usable IDP kind of at an end now. So if we, as Cam Lewis managers, get news that Teron Johnson is going to play in week 6, then Cam Lewis can safely be dropped, right? So that one I just wanted to include there, more of an FYI, because I like Lewis and everything he's done so far, but the Bills will go away from him once Teron Johnson is healthy. So we just need to as well. Okay, as usual, let's check out the linebacker situations du jour here. And we have to start with the Carolina Panthers and rookie Trevin Wallace, who stepped into a 100% snap role this week and did not look out of place, putting together a game-high 15 total tackles and grading well so far on the first run of before review. Wallace, of course, he's playing 100% of snaps because Shaq Thompson is out for the year, and Josie Jewell was out of this game with a hamstring injury. So we talked about Trevin Wallace in start-sit this week and how I was ranking him inside the top 20 linebackers this week. It was a great matchup for him to deliver, and he did so. Really like to see that from the rookie. So now have to imagine that even with how well Wallace played in this game, once Jewell is back, Jewell will likely be the lone full-time linebacker for the Panthers, while Wallace plays more of an LB2 70-ish% snap role. So in the meantime, while Jewell is out, this is Wallace's linebacker core to run, while Clouden Sherrillis gets the LB2 role for those deeper leagues. Okay, let's look at some top IDP linebackers returning from injury this week, starting with David Long and the Miami Dolphins. Now, Long missed 2 games with a hamstring injury, came back, and was apparently not quite good enough health-wise to play his full-time usual role. He actually split his snaps right down the middle with Anthony Walker, who had been the linebacker to replace him while he was out. Now, it's not necessarily something to panic about if you're a David Long manager. He did produce very nicely for us prior to the injury in those first 2 games. I imagine this is just, them keeping him on a pitch count so that he doesn't re-aggravate the injury heading into a bye week as well. And that's likely taken into account here, is that Miami will have another week where Long can heal up. So I think by the time they play their next game, unless we hear otherwise, he should be good to go to play closer to a full-time role. The other linebacker returning from injury this week, also in the AFC East, belongs to the Buffalo Bills, as it was Terrell Bernard back from his pec strain. Gave us a scare in week 2 that it might be a season ender, but missed just 2 games and is back playing 100% of the snaps, which we love to see. Yeah, Bernard, he even got himself a pick in his return, which helps us for, the lower tackle totals in this one. But now the linebacker on the Bills, who at least has never really shown low tackle totals so far, Dorian Williams, I do want to touch on him really quickly. He's not been a full-time player this season, but he is making the most of his opportunities. Williams came into this game with a 21% tackle efficiency, which is the best mark among all linebackers who have played at least 100% of defensive snaps on the year. And then in this game, he put up another 21% tackle rate for 11 total tackles on 52 defensive snaps. So really impressive. Is he Kingleton 2.0? I don't know about that. Let's wait until the end of the season before bestowing him that honor. But through 5 games at least, he's looking like it. He's been incredibly efficient, Dorian Williams. So you'd like to see that. Quickly, we did get another linebacker returning from injury this week, where Devon Lloyd came back. He missed last game with I think it was a knee injury. He's back in there and essentially played every snap for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So that was a positive deployment for, this nasty Jacksonville rotation that we've seen. But then we also saw Chad Muma play. He had played pretty close to a full-time role last week when Lloyd was out, but they clearly did not feel good about that. Muma had his workload reduced significantly in this game, playing behind even Ventrell Miller in this one. So Muma didn't play at all in a close game during the fourth quarter. Not sure if this was injury related or just like he bad related, because if we learned anything watching Muma be thrust into a starting role last year when Devon Lloyd was out, well, he is bad. And he wasn't great in this one either. So he's far from startable in most formats at this point. At the very least, maybe, just maybe this signifies some hope for Foye Oluokun to not be rotated off the field so much when he gets back from his IR stint. I mean, Jacksonville won this game by keeping Muma off the field. So hopefully that turns, a light bulb on the head of Ryan Nielsen to say, maybe I can just leave my best players on the field and keep the mid one on the bench. But hey, I'm an optimist and maybe applying too much logic to the situation. So we'll see if they actually do that or not. And then last one from this week, and it's a nice one, a nice positive one here. The Dallas Cowboys have clearly been shown the light, overshown the light, that is, because as we have been expecting with the trend that DeMarvion Overshown is on, we were speculating that he'd be in for a potential 100% snap role in the near future. And this week, he was just that. Overshown and Eric Kendricks both played every defensive snaps for the Cowboys, which is exactly what we want from these two going forward. Get rid of the rotation, put your best players out there, and Overshown has earned that spot. And he's been productive on lower snap shares, and now on a 100% snap share, he continued to be productive. This is one of the ideal defenses for linebacker tackle production as well. Mike Zimmer's scheme, that is because it's such a zone heavy defense and one that points to ideal tackle efficiency for the position because of it. So if we're going to get Kendricks and Overshown at 100% of snaps, then both of these guys can be locked into starting lineups going forward without a concern for like situation specific rotations for Overshown specifically, which could mess with his snaps depending on the game script, right? So like to see that there. And then I'll mention too, Jerome Baker did come back from injury this week for the Seattle Seahawks. He played 100% of snaps alongside Tyrell Dodson as well. I didn't put a slide for it. That's pretty much all I got to say. There's nothing too exciting about the Seattle linebackers usage there. But yeah, that's going to do it for me. Thank you all very much for tuning in, reaching out, liking, subscribing. Again, I appreciate you all. And if you haven't done so yet, feel free to subscribe to the channel. I always appreciate that. It helps me a lot. Or you could leave a 5-star written review on Apple Podcasts. I would greatly appreciate that too. Want to shout out the PFF data collection team as well, working late into the night with this late Sunday night football game, without whom this data wouldn't be possible. So appreciate that team there. The best team in the multiverse, that is. And as always, for you guys, feel free to ask questions in the YouTube comments as well. I'll try to get to them as soon as possible. I'll be back this week doing a week 6 IDP preview with the Green Dot King himself, Mr. Mike Wohlert. Will join me, and we're actually recording that one slightly earlier this week, so it'll be out on Wednesday instead of its usual Thursday release, which will be good. But again, be sure to check out the IDP Fantasy Report when it drops on Tuesday. Well worth the PFF Plus subscription. Again, if you like this information, it's just me doing that for every single game and pretty much every relevant player throughout the entire week. So I'll also get the IDP rankings up by Thursday morning at the latest, and appreciate you all again. Until next time.